Hello, YouTube, and welcome back to another book review from me, your host, Logan Albright. I apologize, this video is a day late because this month has turned out to be a lot busier than I expected it to be, and I didn't get around to it. But I did read a book this week, and the book I read was Man and His Symbols by Carl Gustav Jung. Although it's not solely by Carl Gustav Jung, which I discovered after I bought it, it's more of an anthology. It contains the first chapter is by Jung, and then several subsequent chapters are by different members of his circle, his colleagues, his students, his milieu in Switzerland at the time, who were studying Jungian psychology. I've been interested in Jung for a while, and I've read a couple of his smaller books, and I've enjoyed them. My favorite, I think, being Synchronicity. I find him a much more interesting psychiatrist/psychologist than Freud. I've read a little bit of Freud, and I'm not much of a fan of his. And Jung kind of takes a different approach, which I find much more credible and more interesting and more appealing to my way of viewing the world. And I wanted to read more of him. And I had seen this book a lot of times, and I thought this looks like a good one to read. It was like the last book he worked on in his life, really. And it was conceived as a kind of introduction to his work for the layperson. It was most of the stuff he'd written had been written with an audience of analysts and psychiatrists in mind. And he was approached with the idea of doing something for a general audience, and this is kind of what he came up with, although he only wrote the first part of it. I found it great. I really like this book. The first half is largely concerned with dreams and how symbols manifest themselves in our dreams, and Jung's basic thesis is that dreams are rational and meaningful, and they basically represent a dialogue between the unconscious and the conscious minds, and the unconscious mind being more primitive than the conscious mind. It communicates not through analytical logic and syllogisms and straightforward utterances, but through these more primitive symbols that have to then be decoded by the conscious mind in order to discover what they're meaning. I'm not a big dream guy in general. I like dreams, they're fun, they're interesting, but I've never put too much significance into them. Clearly some dreams mean something. Clearly some dreams are reflections of things that you are anxious about, preoccupied with, memories from your past, things that you've been thinking about all day, reliving experiences. You get those all the time. But I think a lot of dreams are also kind of random noise and just the mind at play and relaxation. So I haven't put too much stock in them, but this book may make me reconsider my position a little bit, because Jung claims that dreams are meaningful and that we should try to interpret them and come up with what they mean. Now, one of the things that Jung says that I really appreciated is that you can't just rely on kind of a stock analysis of dreams, that they're highly personal, highly individual. Something I've always found very hard to believe is these like dream interpretation guides you buy where it says this symbol means this and this symbol means that and this is a sign of this. And it seems incredible to me that this would be the case for everybody. We have such individual personalities and histories and experiences and bodies and everything. Our biology is different, our experience is different. There's no way the same symbol means the same thing for everybody. And Jung says that. He says, he doesn't put any stock in these dream interpretation guides that you can just buy. He says, don't pay any attention to those, because what symbols mean will have everything to do with your own history and your own associations that you build up over the course of your lifetime, which makes a lot more sense to me. So he spends a lot of time talking about dreams and analyzing some sample dreams from people, that his patients, to explain kind of how this works. Now, maybe it's because this was written at an earlier time. This book came out in 1964, I believe, but Jung's practice dated back another 50 years before that. So he's pulling from his whole body of work. Maybe it's because it was an earlier, less technologically developed time, but I feel like the dreams that they describe in this book are much different than the kind of dreams that I have, and they seem much more obviously symbolic than the kind of dreams that I have. There'll be things like, oh, I was on a mountain and I was approached by 3 white horses that had the symbol of the caduceus tattooed on their flanks. And then I met an old wizard who posed me a riddle and I had to go visit a sphinx. And it's all like, these are all kind of very obvious symbolic images that you can see. A lot of religious imagery, a lot of stuff like that. And my dreams tend to be much more chaotic and random than that, and they don't have these kind of archetypical or fairy tale like or legendary like figures that show up in them all the time. They're much more modern and contemporary, and a lot of times it's just me trying to dial a phone number for an hour and messing up the last digit over and over again and having to do it again. Not a whole lot of symbolic interpretation to be had there, I don't think. So, but I don't know, maybe if I delved in more deeply, I'd be able to discover more hidden meanings in my dreams, and I'm kind of agnostic on it, but I found it interesting to read about. One of the things I really liked was he talks about symbols as being different than signs or ciphers. A symbol isn't just a one-to-one meaning. Like a symbol represents a whole array of ideas and associations that are going to be personal and that are going to be not too easy to decode sometimes, and very often very difficult to express through kind of analytical language or ordinary speech. Like trying to actually articulate what they mean is quite difficult at times. And the reason that some stories resonate really well with us, they talk a lot about stories in here. And I'm reminded of people like Joseph Campbell and other people who talk about the power of myth and the power of stories. The reasons these stories resonate over the centuries is the ones that are deeply symbolic and that have symbols in them that speak to the common human experience and our history, our evolution. All these things are what make a story resonate. And one of the stories they talk about is Beauty and the Beast, which is a great story, nice fairy tale story. And there's some discussion of the symbolism of Beauty and the Beast, of how it's a young woman who has to break away from the bond she's built with her father in order to go out into the wilderness and find this, this monster. And over time, she kind of civilizes the monster and forms a bond with him that then replaces the bond she had with her father. And it's that idea of women kind of having to tame their mates. They go out and find these wild, reckless, dangerous men, and they tame them and they civilize them and they make them manageable. And that's sort of the appeal of Beauty and the Beast, is a lot of that. And I think there's a lot of other symbolism in there as well, but that's part of it. So that kind of stuff is interesting. And then there was a chapter later on in the book that really dealt heavily with modern art. And I found that a very refreshing change from all the dream talk, because there was so much about dreams. And I'm a big fan of modern art. A lot of people don't like it. A lot of people love to denigrate it and say, oh, it's just random nonsense, and it doesn't take any talent, and abstract painting doesn't mean anything. And I really like abstract painting. When I say modern art, I'm referring to the movement in like the early 20th century, the surrealists, the Dadaists, the Cubists, the abstract expressionists, those type of people. I don't mean the kind of stuff that people are doing now, but I really like that style of art. And there's quite a lot of discussion about the kind of the role of abstraction and symbolism, and how taking something that is more photorealistic and abstracting it further and further through paint, through sculpture, to make it not even recognizable to the conscious mind is a form of symbolism. And I found that really interesting, because I am a big fan of art, and art is fun to talk about and think about. And I particularly love surrealism. I remember doing a class on surrealism in college and finding it just fascinating. So that kind of stuff appeals to me. And the idea of the unconscious, that you don't really consciously understand what it means, but it has a meaning to you, is appealing to me. I think of that in some of the films I love. I always talk about how much I love David Lynch's films. Like, I think the reason David Lynch's films are so appealing to me is that they resist definite interpretation. They resist conscious analysis. There's something in there that's compelling, but I couldn't really explain what it is, And I think that has a lot to do with this too. So I really enjoyed Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung et al. And others. And I think that he's well worth reading if you want to understand yourself, and you want to understand the psychology of other people, and you want to think more about the unconscious mind. There's these ideas that he talks about a little bit in here, but deals with more extensively in other works, of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences, things like archetypes, things like the collective unconscious. All these concepts I find very useful and influential. And I'm glad that they were developed, and I think that they go a long way towards helping me understand the human condition, which is really what we're all trying to do all the time, is understand the human condition. Are we not? So that was my thoughts, brief and disorganized though they are, on Carl Jung, Man and His Symbols. I certainly want to read more of his work. If you have any other books of his that you particularly enjoy, I would enjoy the recommendations in the comments. I've tried to read some of his stuff that I found a little bit difficult, because it's written more for an audience of medical professionals rather than the layperson like myself. But I do want to delve more into his work. So there you go. That's all you get for this week. If you enjoyed this review, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, leave me comments down below, and check back every week for yet more book reviews. I try to keep them coming as regularly as I can, even though I'm not always perfect at it. Thank you so much for watching. I've been your host, Logan Albright, and I'll catch you next time.